everyone. So again, we're going to have a conversation with Phil Brochard, who is the rector at All Saints, Berkeley, California, Paul Frolick, rector at St. Matthew's in Syracuse, and the director of the college in his diocese. So first, just a little refresher on this fascinating, ever fascinating model. And Alyssa, would someone put it up for me?
I've got it.
Fabulous. And every time we teach it, I think all of us see a new dimension. So as a refresher, this is a model that is really a tool for leaders as they try to think about and shape what they will be doing to support the faith development of an entire community. It's a tool for leaders to think through that and to intervene in what they will do to help shape the faith development of an entire community. And it has some assumptions in it. Well, anyway, you know, the vicariously connected, those are people who feel like your place is their place, but they don't actually come. Occasional attenders, Christmas and Easter, or people coming to funerals and weddings, Sunday sacramentalists, people who have a pattern of attendance on a Sunday at the Eucharist, mature practitioners, people who have internalized the life of prayer and the life of action. I'd say someone who has a well-developed, vigorous sense of baptismal identity and purpose. So the assumptions in this model are that a parish church is a system and pieces affect each other organically. Another assumption is that participation has the potential to foster maturity, and that God is active in the context. So the other thing is this sits in a context, really important, and that God is active in drawing people towards maturity. God is always inviting people to go deeper. A third assumption is that all these different rings are ways of faith, are faithful. Another assumption is that our role is to open the pathway so that when people are ready, they can move ever towards a maturing faith. And another thing that we say about this model is it's important always to care for the mature or the maturing practitioners. So that's that model. So because Paul, you're just right in my sight line. So talk to us about, you know, what you're learning about this model, permutations of it, or the way it's expressing itself or not in this situation as you think about your own parish.
Sure. So in Central New York, in New York State, the Bishop of Central New York sent out pastoral directives on Saturday evening, March 14th, saying that the next morning, March 15th, would be the last time we would meet for worship in person. And as it happened that same week, Carrie Schofield-Broadbent and I had been planning a series of forums on faith development and community in the diocese. And so this model had been on my mind. And so I got up to lead worship in person for the last time on the 15th. And where my mind went as I was going through the morning, watching people at worship, talking to people at coffee hour, was how are we going to provide opportunities for our mature practitioners to continue to develop and practice their faith in this time? And it helped me focus in a laser sort of way on what it looks like to be a mature practitioner at St. Matthew's. And what I came up with that morning, which I don't think is perfect, but it's what percolated up for me, was that our mature practitioners really value the connection with each other. And I saw that in our passing of the peace, which takes a good long time. Even though we had put some guidelines around that, it still took a good long time, and people had a real trouble following those guidelines that morning. And that our folks stay after for coffee hour after each service for about an hour. It's the personal connection with folks that was really important. And the second thing about being a mature practitioner at St. Matthew's that I noticed that morning was wanting to be of service to others. And so the two things that we focused on in that first week were how we were going to do worship that provided the maximum amount of connection for folks, and the the answer that we came up with out of that was Zoom worship made sense. People could see each other on screen. They could join worship beforehand and kind of shout out to each other. We held virtual coffee hours after both services. We had both services because we felt people would want to see the people on screen that they would normally see in worship. And then we worked hard to figure out how it is we could be of service to folks in need in our community in ways that were also safe for us, that followed good physical distancing, that protected our own health. We learned a couple of things in paying such close attention to our mature practitioners and our Sunday sacramentalists. Probably Zoom worship was not so easy to join. It definitely was not so easy to join for vicariously connected folks. A lot easier, I think, to sort of check us out if we had been live streaming in a sort of anonymous way before kind of taking the step to join us in person in Zoom. What we did see in the first few weeks were folks who were joining by phone, so you just saw a phone number, and I wasn't really thinking things through, and so I was kind of calling those phone numbers out and asking them to introduce themselves, which is the equivalent of asking visitors at the announcement time to introduce themselves. Great for extroverts, really bad for folks who are just trying to be anonymous, check you out without putting too much of a foot in the water.
Other comments, Paul?
We also found, this wasn't maybe, this is an observation, not something that maybe we planned, but this situation has provided opportunities for our occasional attenders to reconnect with us. So the first group that we noticed were folks who winter in Florida who weren't back yet. And then we've had kind of a steady stream of folks who, for one reason or another, had drifted away from the congregation, who have kind of found us again, probably certainly out of a spiritual need created by this crisis, but also maybe easier to join us virtually than it might have been to join us in person. And so I'm curious. I've been curious about ways that people are connecting with us in this time.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, no, different kind of situation at Christ Church Cathedral, where we did live stream and then filmed worship, but the numbers just far outpaced what we would normally see on a Sunday morning. And then of course the question becomes, okay, how do we open up that gateway between those who are just there for the first time checking us out and those who might want to take the next step in, and how do we do that intentionally in ways we could have done in person so much more easily. So Phil again is the rector at All Souls, Berkeley, California. Phil, talk to us about what you've learned about the model in action, or just insights you've had as you've experienced this in your parish.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned, I think within the first week, is this model is really true. When I first was introduced to it, I was kind of skeptical of it and didn't quite understand it in the way that I think I do now. And it came because we went with a live stream because we felt like that was the best way to connect with a different number of folks and the way that people practiced at All Souls. And what we found in the comment section were people who I thought they were gone. I thought these people would practice with us, and then 2-3 years pass and hadn't seen them in forever, saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that All Souls is live streaming. This is like so important to me right now." I was like, "Whoa, look, there you are." I didn't think you were still around, and so I think those were folks who were participating vicariously or even just occasionally. But now it was almost like I know we were in a dark room and somebody flipped on the switch, and all of a sudden we could see people in a way that we couldn't beforehand. And so one of the things that we've been trying to pay attention to, both before the service, and then during an announcement time in the service, and then at the end of the service, so at least 3 times, is welcoming people in expressly. You know, if you've been here before, if you've never been to the corner of Cedar and Spruce, which is our cross streets, thank you for joining us. And we have lots of ways to practice this together. One of the things that we did several years ago when people were kind of getting, wanting to know what it meant to become a member of All Souls, we came up with 6 essential practices that we worship together, we pray together, we eat together, we learn together, we serve together, and we give together. And what we've discovered in these last several weeks is 4 of those 6 practices you can do without being in our space with us. And so we've been trying to key people into ways to do this, that these practices can happen wherever you are. And then just a kind of a unique thing about All Souls is, since we're in Berkeley, and so there's lots of international students who come to do sabbaticals and study leaves, and people from across the country as well, is that we have folks who've participated with us in person who are now all over the country, in Texas and New York and all over the world, that are streaming our services. And now it's kind of like, okay, so where do they fall on this chart? And so they're mature practitioners in, Austria, say, but they're also engaging our faith community to practice their faith. And so what can we do to provide ways in for them? And then now we're becoming more aware of the people who are practicing locally but digitally, as Paul said, like just checking us out. And so how do we help them find out ways in? And so one of the ways, I think Andrea had asked a question in the chat about how to get people to sign up in some way. And so one of the ways we're trying to do it, and this is somewhat specific to Facebook, but be able to have people direct message us and say, as a way to raise your hand, because we have people raise their hand in the service. We don't ask them to do anything, just so we can bring a newcomers packet. So we're trying to find ways for people just to raise a hand and have the threshold be as low as it possibly can. And we're also starting newcomers classes online and more small groups, because, and some people are totally overwhelmed with Zoom and don't want another thing to do, but that's not the case for everybody. And so finding ways to do practice that people can integrate into now is what we're trying to pay attention to.
Well, how interesting. Yeah. Christchurch Cathedral.
This whole time, how interesting.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. If you have a second to say that, right?
Right.
Paul, did you want to respond to anything?
It's just a little too interesting time, but I want to give a shout out to Gather, Transform, Send. That we've been trying to think intentionally about how we're inviting people, and the whole security thing with Zoom makes that a little tricky. But it is the mature practitioners who are then reaching out to their friends and neighbors and saying, you ought to join us for a church. And then they can share the link with them. That has been a kind of a safe way to do that, and natural kind of organic way to do the invitation. And then the greeting, as Phil said, if this is the first time you've joined us, how to connect with folks, orienting people to Zoom, about where the chat feature is, the different ways to look at it, etc. So the Gather Transform actually works in this crisis as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And as part of that, for those of you on Facebook, watch parties have been something that's been really helpful for us, because it's just like, it's each person who's going to do a watch party broadcasting to pretty much everybody who's connected to them on Facebook. Here's what I'm doing. And I'm not as interested in like the 3-second or 10-second views. That's not, yes, there's some exposure there, but more often what happens is, one of our parishioners put it up, and their friend Teresa was like, oh right, I know you from the Latina moms and parents group at our school, and oh that's right, you go to that church. And then a conversation happens, and there's something that comes out of that. and that to me, so I'm not a person who's on Facebook hardly at all. And so it's something that I found that you can work, maybe the corporate overlords can help the gospel in some way.
Phil, someone's asked a question about what's a watch party.
Oh yeah, so I'm probably not the best person to talk about this, but I'll give it a go. So a watch party is a function on Facebook that if you're going to watch a live stream of something, you can do, and I think Alyssa's about to put some instructions in the chat area, but you can signal to the people who are on your friend list, here's something you're going to participate in, and you connect it to that stream so that other people will click onto it or it'll appear on their feed. In this case, it was Tony Martinez Borgfeld is doing a watch party for All Souls on Sunday morning.
Great.
Yeah, the other thing that came to me, Melissa, and what you were saying earlier, is that one of the core understandings of this model is that participation fosters maturity. And somebody in the chat section said, okay, so what we mean by participation, like in a brick and mortar way, is just not there. And so that to me is a super interesting question. What does participation mean? Because I think for us, it's meant, okay, so how can we practice this and never set foot, maybe ever, where our church is? And so it's meant, we've published some practice reflections on the Stations of the Resurrection that people can practice in small group, but also do on their own. And so finding as many avenues like that. People are making sandwiches at home, so that we have drivers that swing through neighborhoods and pick up the sandwiches, aggregate them, put them into lunch bags, and we bring them to homeless academies. So things like that that people can do where they are to practice it and then aggregate, I think are helpful right now.
That's great. So a thing that's come up for me is it feels like the context within which our parishes, our churches are operating kind of calls the question in a new way on what Christian maturity is. It just makes the stakes are higher now. And so people are, my perception is there are more people who I would say are longing for a way that praxis, and prayer, the praxis of the faith, to include prayer and being grounded in something larger than ourselves that feeds our soul, how those go together. And back to this thing about self-care, we won't call it that, but it does feel like if we assume that God is beckoning people to go deeper in all situations, how can this moment be a moment where we learn more about that in people's lives? So people who are juggling families at home, work, prayer life, their own sanity, or in other ways, people who are on the front lines of the healthcare industry or who work in grocery stores, or how can this be, our learning about this lead us to intentionally build in those things that have the chance of fostering maturity in that way, allowing people to be invited deeper when they're ready to go. Anyway, I wonder if either of you have thoughts about that.
I have a few. Paul, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Phil.
So one of the things I've been really excited to do is to stop doing some things at All Souls, because, and it's partly been necessity, we just can't do it the same way we've been doing it, right? We just can't be in that place, or we can't have those people or whatever. And so there's been a great freedom in that, and also loss and grief, because people have found a lot of meaning in that. But it's also made me, if we're going to give shout out to other models for sources of transformation, because what I love about that model is it's not like a list of ministries you need to have in order to be a healthy church, and it's not a compendium of curricula. Here are some of the reliable ways that God has shown up in people's lives over centuries, and they've been changed. And so for us, it was looking at conversation within life and community, and connecting that with personal prayer practices. And so that's kind of what we came to with this Stations of the Resurrection PDF booklet that we sent out, because we have small groups that are meeting together and they can use this to deepen with. Will everybody do it? No, but I think we're getting it. It's the mature practitioners, I think, are using it, and we're into some of the Sunday sacramentalists and a little bit beyond that. But going to that model, because I think people are just hungry for connection, and I don't mean more Zoom calls. I don't think anybody, or a few people may be hungry for that, but they're really hungry to connect with other people and with God, and maybe even to understand themselves. And so going to that model has helped us go, okay, if that's a reliable way that God has shown up, irrespective of how we did it 3 months ago, how can we look at that model and find out how can we help people encounter God in that way right now?
Great. Paul, what do you think?
I agree with everything Phil just said, and I'm gonna let Phil have the last word just this once, because we're at time, and I'm gonna